Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to today's G session of What is Your G Status? Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, November 11th, a very, very important day. Today is Veterans Day. I want to say thank you and all of us to acknowledge the service that our past veterans and future veterans and present veterans, that what they've done on our behalf, and that means they protected our freedom. So on behalf of Immigrants Are Us, the Generation Project, we would like to acknowledge Veterans Day and again offer our thanks and our best wishes to all the veterans who have essentially protected the freedom of America. Thank you very much. Today, not only being Veterans Day, it's the second installment of November What is Your G Sessions? I said, and I've told you, my name is Lorna Harris, and you'll have the pleasure of seeing me one more week with another guest of the G Status. So, the G Status is all about knowing what your G status is. We ask this question over and over and over again. So, this is what it means. As the executive producer of the project, I came on board really not knowing or understanding what is a G status. And I quickly learned through my connections of culture and heritage that a G status, so if your parents were born elsewhere and not in the United States, they're G zeros. If your mother was born in the United States, she's a G1, and you will be a G2, and so forth and so on. Seeing ourselves in each other and each other in ourselves lets us know that we are all immigrants, every single one of us. So today we have the pleasure and the unique honor of having a guest to ask what his G status is. His name is Kevyn Fairchild. Let's bring Kevyn Fairchild on the screen. Hey, Kevyn.
Hey, Lorna, how are you?
I am doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And thank you for asking me to be part of this great project.
You're very, very welcome. So, Kevyn, the question is, as you've heard, what is your G status? And what is your understanding of G status? And how does that work for you? Can you tell us about it from your
Yes.
perspective?
Yeah, so my G status is that I am a G2. My grandparents were born in Hungary and immigrated over as refugees from the 1956 revolution. So while they brought with them my uncle, who was born in Hungary, my mom was actually born here in the United States. So I guess that makes me a G2, which is very nice. I grew up with very much a bicultural sort of feeling. My grandparents were really very big on making sure that I understood my Hungarian side, my Hungarian heritage, including actually teaching me how to speak Hungarian, which was very rare for a lot of the refugees who came over in 56, because a lot of them were very much interested more in sort of assimilating into American society. And so they weren't that keen on making sure that their children or their grandchildren spoke Hungarian, understood how to cook, sort of understood what the culture was. So I was very, very happy and privileged to be able to have that history. My father's side of the family goes back quite a while here in the U.S., so I'm not even sure what G status I am on them. But thanks to our conversations, I'm actually looking into it so I could know better on both sides of the family. But they were, very much sort of your tried and true through and through Americans. So, that was very much what was going on that side of the family.
Well, it's interesting, Kevyn, that your mother being a G1 married an American, as you say. And so, what was that assimilation or integration within the two, between the two cultures of being Hungarian and still being an American? And were you in the middle of all of that?
I was definitely very much in the middle of it. But I would also say that, when my grandparents came from Hungary, they sort of transitioned through New York, and then they landed in a small mountain town in Colorado, Carbondale, Colorado. And the only reason anyone ever knows Carbondale is because you have to go through it to get to Aspen.
Mm.
And so, marrying an American was pretty much the only thing that she could do, so to speak. So, we had family friends in like Denver. There was a small Hungarian population in Denver that my grandparents had known from the old country, but they were pretty much immersed into the American sort of side of things.
So, what was it like going to school, um, mixing it up with everybody else in Carbondale, and coming home and hearing and eating Hungarian and being from Hungary?
Yeah, it was strange because it was also, this was before there were a lot of immigrants in Carbondale, and now you look at the city and it's very different. There's actually a fairly large immigrant population, but
Hmm.
in the 50s when my mom was growing up, in the 60s there wasn't a huge immigration population. It was, it was a mining town, and up until fairly recently was still largely a mining town with some, long family agriculture, some farms and ranches and things like that. So it was very, it was very sort of American in that way. Um, and then I, growing up, because my mom, she doesn't speak with an accent or anything because obviously she grew up here. So I think it confused people when I was growing up a little bit because they expected that my mom would have been the immigrant because I did speak the language, because I was so kind of like in tune with what was happening culturally.
So, what does that do for you? And why did your family come here in the first place?
So I'll do the yeah. So what it did for me is I think it gives me an ability to really see a lot of things from two sides of something, where I'm able to kind of look at everything in multiple ways and from multiple perspectives. It also really makes me appreciate the difference between assimilation and integration, and the
Mhm.
idea of immigrants being able to maintain the culture that they grew up with and being able to pass that down to families for future generations, so they can also understand and appreciate that they do come from a culture. And even though we may be Americans, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are only Americans, and that we can actually fold different things into what that American identity is for us. In terms of what brought my grandparents over, like there was several 100,000 refugees actually, from the revolution that actually happened in Hungary
Mhm.
between October and the beginning of November. It ended on November 10th,
Wow.
1956. Um, and that caused a lot of people to have to flee the Soviet government. And so there were a lot of people who stood up against the Soviet government, Soviet oppression, and obviously they did not win the revolution.
Mhm.
So my grandfather was a fighter in the revolution, and they fled to a refugee camp in what was then Yugoslavia, and is now not Yugoslavia. I think it's in Serbia. Anyway,
Yeah.
they had fled.
Yugoslavia changed.
Yeah, they'd fled. It's in one of the Baltic states, because I'm not exactly sure which side of the border it was on. But anyway, they had fled, and spent a number of months in that refugee camp before they were allowed immigration here to the United States. And so, much like we have refugee crises today, a lot of them were allowed entrance here to the United States. Most of them actually went to Canada. So Toronto actually has, as I understand it, the largest Hungarian population outside of Hungary is in Toronto. But there are also large concentrations here in New York and in Ohio, some in New Jersey, and then Colorado, sort of going west.
Kevyn, we haven't really talked about your work, but I know about it. So I want you to share your interest of how you view the world through an incredible lens of culture and inclusion. And I find that to be very Hungarian as well. As I've done my research, there's some really famous Hungarian photographers and filmmakers and movie people, and here you are in that same field. How did that happen?
Yeah, there are actually. In fact, one of my favorite photographers, he was a Bauhaus photographer, Laszlo Maholi Nagy, is actually from the same village that my grandparents are from in the south of Hungary. Um,
Oh,
yeah, I think there's something to looking at the world through a lens that allows you to simultaneously be part of the world that you're photographing, but also separated from it just slightly. That there is something that not a barrier, but there's something that sort of sits between you and the rest of the world, and that's probably a decent way of looking at the way I sort of feel about my own position in the world, sort of having one foot in two worlds. I have a good friend of mine, Tiziana Rinaldi. She's an Italian immigrant who heads up this great project where she talks about immigrants having one foot in both worlds, particularly what you
mhm,
would consider Gen Zero or G status zeros,
right.
where you kind of feel like you're not quite fully American yet, but you're not quite fully where you come from yet. And so I think that because I had such a strong influence from my grandparents growing up, I inherited a piece of that where I have like a foot in both worlds. So as a creator, as a photographer, I'm able to kind of straddle that when I'm looking at creating representative images or translating images through my lens, as just kind of like how I see the world as opposed to exactly just how it is.
So, also through your work, you've been involved with some present day technology because of us all having to pivot into virtual world and to present our work, whether it's photography, whether it's spoken word, whatever it is. So, what does that look like for you? I understand that you are doing some podcasts for some political figures, hopefuls.
Yeah, so I've always been a big fan of radio. I actually went to school for film. Probably should have gone to school for radio, but I didn't. But so I like the radio platform and podcasting because it's portable. You can take it with you. I think you can do a lot of really amazing things with just audio. And mostly I landed there because I kept thinking about wanting to be able to help other people tell their stories. And, I thought about the world of documentary, but when I sat down to really think about documentaries, I didn't really like the B roll. I didn't like the video aspect of it. And so I realized that really what I wanted to produce is just audio documentaries. And that's kind of where I landed on podcasting. It's just this idea where the image doesn't have to be there. We can hear stories, we can understand and appreciate people's perspectives just through their words and through their experiences. And the other thing I love is that you can take it out with you. And yes, you can take YouTube and videos out with you into the world, but there's something different about being able to just listen to an audio presentation or an audio podcast that's like a voiceover for everything that's happening to you as you're walking through the world.
Interesting. So, back to your G status. How is that making a difference today, or is it?
Yeah, I think it's really about, you know, understanding perspectives and understanding experiences and being, um, realistic in terms of expectations of what people's actual lives are like and why they come to this country. The people come to this country for a lot of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Some are pushed here, some are pulled here, some come here voluntarily, some don't come here voluntarily because their parents bring them. There's a lot of different reasons why people come. And that all of that really has lasting impacts on who we are as a society and a culture. And you and I have had many conversations about my frustration with the notion of equality and sameness, or equality and access to things coming out of a space of sameness.
Yeah.
And I really, you know, I would really love for us to be able to get to a point where we can have empathy with someone who doesn't have to relate their life experience to ours, that we can actually appreciate all of our lived experiences, all of our cultures, all of our identities, all of the intersections that make
Yeah.
us who we are for what they are and not have to find ourselves within that story. You know, growing up queer as well, I think that also helps that idea of sort of, you know, what path do I want to carve that's my own, having an understanding of history and culture, but how do you make that your own? How do you, what does that mean for you as an individual living in this collective world, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. And it's still, to me, points, it's indicative of how powerful it is to know where you came from.
Yeah.
And from a generational perspective, a lot of us know who our grandfather was, what country our grandmother came from, but to really know from a perspective of a generation one, a generation two, Kevyn, I am a G7. The pride that that brings me and the power that that gives me is incredible.
Yeah.
And when I really, really acknowledged that, it just made me skip a few more beats. Like, oh my gosh, I'm really, really, really great. I'm a G7.
Yeah.
So I am really glad that we're having this conversation. And you brought up a lot of things. You brought up gender, you brought up identity, you brought up sexuality, you brought up talent of using photography. I think there's something else that you're interested in that you really haven't shared is print. Taking images and the spoken word and transforming them into some type of a book, so to speak.
Yeah, so just this year, I started the process of laying out my first two photo books. Late
Okay.
last year, I had my first solo photography exhibit that was 10 years of my photography of New York. It was basically my 10th year anniversary of moving to New York from Colorado. And I, for another project earlier this year, laid out a book of photographs taken on and of the Staten Island ferry, because it was living here on Staten Island, commuting to the city every day for work. It was such a huge part of my experience living here in New York. And now that I don't have, none of us are commuting anymore. I don't take the ferry every day. I kind of miss it. I got to take it yesterday, and I thought, oh, I really miss this.
So, Kevyn, you know, I'm sorry to interrupt you in all of this,
No, it's
but
okay.
we have 20 minutes, and 20 minutes goes by so quickly.
It
We've
does.
learned a lot about you. We've learned a lot about Hungary. But what did you bring along to share with us, Kevyn, for that describes your G status or has some type of affinity to what you love about Hungary?
So one of the things I really love, and one of the things I often think about when I think about Hungary, is actually the incredible hand embroidery. And so I brought this little vest that's actually a child-size vest. It's very small,
Beautiful.
but it has all this really great embroidery on it, and it's very, you know, I have doilies, I have all these things that are in my house that are very much in this creative vein that I absolutely love.
Well, Kevyn, I thank you for sharing with us. I thank you for this in-depth conversation that hit upon integration, assimilation, all of these important topics of the day. It's just been terrific. I'd like to tell our audience and all of those people that you have an opportunity to follow us on social media. And next week, we're bringing in an incredible guest, another filmmaker, Mayhan Benetti of the African Film Festival. And back to today, this important day of honoring our freedom. Let's not forget. Let's all take this very, very seriously and be proud of our G status. And if you don't know your G status, I encourage you to go and find out. Check out our website at www.gproject.org. And we shall see you next week at 4 o'clock on Facebook Live. Thanks again, Kevyn Fairchild.
Thank you for having me. It's a great project. Happy to be part of it.
Great. Love you, Kevyn.
Love you too. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.